Hello and welcome to the Amargi Mosaic. We're so glad you've joined us today. I'm Elif Sarican, writer, editor, translator, and your host. At the Amargi Mosaic, we're piecing together conversations from Kurdistan and the Middle East, bringing you stories and insights you might not hear elsewhere. We're a grassroots-funded media collective powered by journalists and academics who believe in independent voices, not corporate agendas. So whether you're here to learn, stay informed, or simply curious about the region, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, don't forget to follow us at theamargi.com and all the social media platforms you see on your screen. Your support helps us grow and keep these conversations alive. And today we have a very important a conversation that has been timely for the last decade. We'll be speaking about Syria and particularly the position and the reality for women in Syria. Now, as many of you know, the conflict and the war in Syria has been going on for over a decade. There's been many elements to it, and there's been many aspects from the alternatives being built in the north of the country to the collectives and the resistance committees in other parts of the countries, to obviously the developments that started a year ago with the toppling of the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad, and with the incoming interim president Ahmed el-Shara, also known as Mohammed Jolani. So what we're going to be doing is talking to Zaina Erhaim today about particularly the reality for women and what the future for women are in the country. And Zaina, you're an award-winning Syrian journalist working as media and communications consultant in the Middle East and North Africa region. Your work training citizen journalists during the war, particularly women, has been crucial in amplifying Syrian voices that would otherwise go unheard. Your writing in publications from the New York Times to New Lines magazine have consistently centered women's experience of war, resistance, and survival. Most recently, you founded the Women Journalists Alliance that unites Arabic-speaking female journalists from across the region and aims to empower female journalists by providing resources, guidance, training, solidarity campaigns, and building a supportive professional community. Hi and welcome to the show, Zaina.
Hi, thank you for hosting me.
So in your article, What is Life Without Bashar al-Assad, you capture the surreal moment of his fall. People unable to believe it, even as evidence mounted. You write about Syrian women celebrating yet remaining deeply anxious about, I suppose, the way and who was doing the overthrowing. And having documented women's resistance for over a decade, what specific fears do women in Syria have now that weren't there during the revolution's early days? You've observed women navigating between Assad's authoritarianism and Islamist extremism, particularly in Idlib, for years. How has their political consciousness evolved through surviving, both bombardment, but also some of the kind of extremist or Islamist realities that they were facing on the ground?
Okay, too many questions, but I will start with the early days. It's very different. The fears, the gendered fears at the early days were completely different. The kind of spaces that women were holding within these uprising, demonstrations, organizing movements. Recently, I was watching the demonstrations happening in Morocco. There was one scene that was so triggering and took me back to literally 2011, where women were literally kind of attacking the security forces, trying to arrest someone and dragging him. Especially in Aleppo, at the early days, the security forces were avoiding to arrest women at that particular, like the very beginning. So what the women were doing, they kind of established their own battalions to release those who are being detained. So imagine a guy in the demonstration being arrested by the security forces, and then women who don't know him, mostly young, are just going, and this is my husband, this is my brother, and dragging him literally away from the mouth of the monster without knowing who he is. The courage, the space, the confidence that they had, and the way that, I mean, at that point, they felt their partners. They are part of the uprising. They are part of the movements. And they were not just that, they were leaders in this movement. Things were changed certainly later on as arms were much more spread. With the military kind of atmosphere, women's role automatically shrink. And then when we're speaking about more conservative, more Islamist armed groups, then they are being pushed away twice as harsh as other armed movements. How things escalated, I think, as the war escalated, women's role were being pushed back again to being taking the caring roles, the previous stereotypical roles. You can be a nurse helping on the front line, but you cannot be in these areas. This is only men's spaces. You're not allowed to be in. So even the active participation and partnerships role were questioned. Many women had to flee. Many had to leave that then became rebel-held areas and leave the country. And things changed. I remember in Eastern Aleppo, the number of women journalists or women activists at that point were literally counted, which is really sad compared to just a couple of years earlier in 2011. Things kept on that way. Women were struggling and fighting on so many fronts, on their households, on their domestic violence in the streets, the barrel bombs, and then the rulers who were mainly focusing on their dress code, whom you're talking with, do you have a male garden, and all of these restrictions, which hasn't been lifted. So, and we can't really speak about one Syria in any context. There has always been at least 3-4 Syrias who are ruled by different groups, who have different laws and different dynamics and different social norms. So speaking about Syria as a homogeneous country is really misleading. And only when people were able to cross from the north to the other Syria or to Damascus, or now from Al-Hasaki to Damascus, people are realizing how different worlds they live in. We've always, even before the uprising, we've always been raised to be separated, segregated, no communication. We only have stereotypes of each other as communities. But after the war and after the segregation, we literally forget who we are. So people in Damascus now ask really very obvious questions about people coming from Idlib and vice versa. So getting to know each other now and remembering who we are is really one main element of being able to break this again. And the only hope, I think, for women now to be able to navigate through all of this previous and new challenges is by combining their efforts. And unless they actually get to know each other and understand the different pasts that they have, they wouldn't be able to build this.
Thank you so much. And what we've seen particularly in the last year has been, with the changing reality, with, the HTS and Ahmed al-Shara's forces taking power in Damascus and, de facto claiming control or authority over the whole of Syria. There's been various sites of negotiation. We've heard about negotiations at some point in Aleppo of how the women's forces can exist alongside some of the now interim government forces. There's also been women's conferences in trying to bring together women from different regions of Syria, because as you've said, there's been multiple Syrias or different realities that people have existed that have experienced, particularly in the last decade. But actually, it seems like this definitely goes much deeper. So there's been also, alongside some of the realities we've seen, there's been scenes of hope of, women in Sueda sending messages to women's conferences and so on. You've mentioned also that a lot of people have been asking, what's next, particularly, obviously, for women's lives. Do you think that women in Syria are being included in answering that question in a meaningful way?
Well, sadly, I think in Syria and in the whole region, during war and post-war, women and marginalized groups are being marginalized again and again. If you take all the men out of the frames from all the formal pictures that we are seeing inside Syria and outside Syria now, you will have literally empty frames. Even the conferences that are being held on Syria, you wouldn't find Syrian women. The conferences that are being held inside Syria, you won't find Syrian women. And only 2 days ago, some women journalists from Aleppo issued a declaration saying, hey, we exist. Because all the meetings that are happening, I mean, and the sad thing is that it's normalized. Now, if you see a picture with 20, 30 men speaking about something without having a woman in, you don't even question it. It's just the norm nowadays. However, I think there is a parallel movement that is happening among women, including those women who were sacrificing a lot, especially the moms of those who were detainees, the moms of those who were killed by different parties who are trying to lead some initiatives for coexistence, for leaders. Yesterday, the sister was a very well-known activist who was in prison at the beginning of the uprising, and he is considered to be the icon of peaceful movement, Riyas Matar. She is still living in El Sueda, and she is a Sunni from the area. She was interviewed in one of the Sueda local media, speaking about the Sueda people as her family and speaking about the violations committed against them. I mean, the amount of courage that position and her ability to show her face and speak the truth as a woman, as a sister of such a figure. So there are some parallel movements that the women are doing. I think they are still parallel. They're certainly outside of the system. And I don't think the international community is pressuring enough for this. And at this point, sadly, this could be one of the main things that would push the women's participation forward is the international pressure. And even some kind of more pressure in terms of on the government, on the local partners to do more about women's participation and existence and quotas. But how this is going to be kind of developing, I really don't know. But I know that through these 14 years, women have always been pushed back by different perpetrators, by different rules, by different attacks. Sorry, my cat decided to litter now, and I'm sitting in her space. So we'll wait for her to finish because she will keep. Sisi. I will repeat that. Let's just start. So during these 14 years, women have always been pushed back and were forced to be fighting on so many fronts for them to exist, for them to be heard, for them to be part of the decisions that are affecting their own lives and their homeland's lives. And they always find their ways, but sadly with much more effort and with lots of sacrifices. And less women are being able and continuing this because it's too much. And now you can add to that the hostile online gaslighting campaigns that are targeting all of those women who are daring to be active in public spaces and online. The numerous online campaigns that are attacking women activists is pushing them away and keeping even our online spaces more sexist, patriarchal, and misogynist.
I mean, I guess there's also a question of whether the current, quote unquote, interim government actually has the capability of integrating more women's quotas. But I think that's a question for another time. I think it was very important what you said about particularly the kind of, you talking about the responsibility of, like kind of a journalistic approach. And of course, one of the first, I suppose, principles of journalism is the responsibility to the truth. And in one of your articles, you write about the gap between digital narratives and on the ground realities, which you've just also spoken about. And you've documented, which you're saying that they are a bit more difficult now, but like women's underground networks, quiet resistances, and daily negotiations that don't make the headlines, particularly in international media or in the West, creating an archive of experiences across, more than a decade. As someone who understands that, sadly, most of the time, history gets written by victors, what are you most, I suppose, afraid or anxious will be erased about women's political visions and experiments? And how does women's organizing actually work beyond what we see on social media? And I suppose, crucially, which stories and which realities or which experiences are at most risk of disappearing as international actors rush to normalize relations with Syria's new interim leadership?
In general, the narratives that are being told about women are patriarchal, are written by men figures, especially those who are populists. So it's not just like a sexist narrative, but it's also discriminating against all of those who are swimming against the currents or who are providing a more marginalized perspective. And this is one of the main things that I actually decided to stay in the rebel-held areas for, is to capture the narratives of the women who are being silenced. And because I felt if a girl is going to be sitting online after 20 years and she's going to be searching Syrian women, she will only find Syrian women martyrs, Syrian women who are mothers of martyrs, and Syrian women who are relatives of martyrs, which means they are a side character in our own lives and in our own history. And I've been trying to document and countering this by documenting the stories of the women being told by themselves in different ways, documenting as filming, as encouraging them to do their own blogs, verbal history. And currently by working with women journalists who are also trying to encourage women to do their own stories in their own ways and capture those different elements. Even speaking about anything like economy, like cybersecurity through a feminist lens is one of the elements that I personally am trying to counter that populist and misogynistic narrative about us. As I mentioned earlier, I feel having a seat on the public table and having a voice now is risky, especially if you're like a minority, sectarian minority. If you're an Alawite or Durzi and also have an opinion, it's even harsher than the others. But regardless, if you're a woman and you also have an unpopular opinion, you're gonna put yourself in the risk of a very fierce hate campaigns. For me, for example, I don't want to, as we say in Arabic, to burn my bridges back to Syria. So I'm trying to self-censor myself on so many elements. And I'm not going to be commenting on so many of the things that you're saying, because I want to go back. And I feel that I was forced to be away from Syria for like over 10 years. And the amount of work that I would have been able to do from inside is different. So having always to take all of this consideration for just being, for keeping your independence and keeping your voice loud is too much to handle. And finding the balance is also like very stressful. And again, you cannot guarantee not only your safety, but as a woman, the attacks mainly target your family, your tribe and your town, because everyone is responsible for your behavior because you're not a complete independent person. But going back to the narratives, I believe women are trying to keep their narratives on the different sides, not the mainstream one, because the mainstream ones are against them. Speaking about the mainstream media in Syria now, the number of women who are in higher positions, the number of women who are being given bigger platforms, and even those women who are taking more marginalized media platforms, the kind of attacks that they're getting is this encouraging them. But many are working on documenting what's happening through books, like novelist Amargi Mosaic, who has been doing this since the very beginning of the uprising, and she's still doing it now, and others who are doing it through films, pieces, and other methods. But how much that marginalized and feminist narrative is being attacked? A lot.
And I think, as you said, particularly women are navigating between quite a lot more factors than perhaps others are. In a previous article, you've also argued that, framing Syria as secular dictatorship versus religious extremism is a lazy and harmful binary. And what we've seen in the last, over a decade now is northeast Syria's, some also may know it as the Rojava region. The women there have built an autonomous system entirely outside both frameworks, with women's councils, armed units and cooperatives. You also documented women in Idlib who found ways to resist extremism while remaining within their communities. And we've also seen in the last few months the way particularly the YPG, which means the women's protection units, have spoken about their red lines of disarming and compromising the self-defense of women. Are these different strategies, like the Northeast Syria's parallel institutions and Idlib's negotiations within existing structures, part of the same, third way, or do they represent fundamentally different visions for what could hopefully be a future for women's liberation within Syria?
Well, I have many kind of concerns related to framing the armed women in Northeast as liberation movement or like independent women. They are part of a very patriarchal element who is leading them. And I think there is plenty of whitewashing women with braids as fighting extremism that's mainly directed to the West. So I have a whole issue related to YPG women forces, but certainly the Kurdish women in Northeast and even in other parts of Syria have been fighting, again, intersectional oppression related to their ethnicity, language, and then for their gender, but fighting not just with arms. I think with arms it's a different conversation. But as always, because women have been oppressed in so many ways, they had to come up with new methods to survive and to find their ways to be there, to exist, and to impact their realities. Whether that's through small initiatives, whether that's through forming alliances, like Families for Freedom and other movements that are still kind of calling for justices and are still asking for a clear transitional justice steps from the current governments. So I think they're trying on so many fronts, and we can see them even on social media despite what's happening. And I gave example now about Inas, the sister of Riyas. Only on her Facebook, she is doing more social cohesion and coexistence between the people of Sweden and the rest of Syria than a lot of very well-funded CSOs and organizations, because she's speaking from her heart, because she is a true kind of human. And she has this position as a very well-known anti-regime figure who sacrificed a lot for freedom. And she is still speaking about justice without any kind of sectarian or populist view. So I think they are taking all the margins that they are given, and they're still trying to push the borders of this margin. But again, I think they have different abilities because of different geographies. Even the style of woman affects what she can do now. Even if you're a Sunni, if you're wearing scarf, not wearing scarf, if your scarf is black or colored or white, everything, these small things that men wouldn't ever think about is affecting how much you can do and how much you can say and what kind of attack you will be getting. Recently, there was a fierce gaslighting campaign against a very young journalist from Homs who was writing about the Sueda as well. And her dad was telling her, no, keep responding, I'm behind you, whatever. And I told her, shut your Facebook down. Because you wouldn't feel it. I mean, I'm speaking out of experience. I told her that the work that you're doing with your pieces and your voice is much more important than all these campaigns, and they will try to destroy you, and most probably they will, at least in the public sphere. So again, testing your limits and the borders is really essential, and all the women are doing it. But now, after the fall of the regime, for the first time, we're seeing things crossing borders. We're seeing women from different regions collaborating on movements, collaborating on campaigns. This is something that wasn't there. In the north, women were, northwest or northeast, women were very isolated, living in their own kind of cantons, and same for the regime-held areas. But now, for the first time ever, we're seeing the collaborative cross-border work between women is feasible. And I think enhancing this would be one of the main elements that would empower the women's participation in public life in general and in politics in specific.
And you tried to document this in a short documentary that you made before, Syria's Rebellious Women. Could you tell us a little bit about that film for those who haven't seen it?
So this is what I was telling you. One of the main things that I stayed in rebel-held areas for was trying to document the extra difficulties that women face because of who they are. So despite being fierce, despite most of the women that I filmed were living on their own, away from their families, fighting both the regime and then the Islamists and then the patriarchal rules that are telling them you're not supposed to be living on your own as a single woman, or you're not supposed to be taking the gas on your own. This is a man's job, like very simple things. So I was trying to document this through the eyes of 5 activists, and I'm kind of still continuing to work on this, also through my own story as one of those women who is facing much more extra difficulties, not just because she's a woman, but she's a vocal, she's an independent, and she's against the current, which are like 3 lethal things that any woman in our region would face, especially in this troubled transitional period where things are really chaotic. So I'm speaking with lots of women in Syria now. Many of them are scared of being kidnapped. Many of them are being scared of just disappearing. And there is no proper system that you can actually count on. It's chaotic. So if you get kidnapped now, what can you do? You call the general security. There are police. There is no police. It's still very kind of fluid. The security situation is very much fluid. And those who have arms and the gangs, it's their haven now. And women are the weakest element in this circumstances. And even those who get kidnapped, then they got bullied and stigmatized for being whatever, sexually harassed or being raped or whatever. So again, it's a circle of vicious violation after the other. And all of this is also even pushing the families to tell their women, no, stay behind, don't go out, so you wouldn't be facing this, which is also another pressure that is being applied on women to stay away from public spaces, to stay away from literally public spaces and even the public sphere as like a political sphere of engagement.
So as a deterrent almost, and it almost seems like it's the, oldest tale in the book replaying itself, which is the violence that women may face used as a deterrent against women to even be active. I mean, that reminds me, in December 2024, when, Assad was formally toppled and Ahmed al-Shara kind of formally declared his presidency or interim presidency, there was a lot of skepticism from a lot of sections of society, but also of those who have been following and trying to do work around different elements of Syria for over a decade. And there was also a lot of pushback by people saying, as long as Assad is gone, we need to give this a chance. Basically there was almost a position where anyone but Assad, and the narrative that was really prevalent was that, how much worse can it get? It was so bad under Assad, how much worse can it get? But sadly, in the last, it's not even been a year, there are a lot of suggestions that there is a chance that it could perhaps be as bad or even worse for some people. So what do you say about that, particularly around women? Because we've seen that, and then there's also been the, quite quick and fast international rehabilitation of Ahmed al-Shara's image and who he is. The British and the US delisted the HTS. The British rushed to make interviews with him and have interviews with him. So do you think a lot of people are also experiencing the fears around things might be as bad or even worse for them, but because of Ahmed al-Shara's international rehabilitation, it might be difficult to speak out against that?
I don't see that connection at all. I think people are still programmed to be scared. They are programmed to consider any official as a threat that we shouldn't be speaking about, even if he is like a governor or even if he is a police. I mean, getting out of over 50 years of a dictatorship, it's not like pretty easy. Most of those who are being critical against the current government are those who were part of the 2011. So they were like a kind of outspoken, and they are still outspoken. But we're seeing most of those who used to be very much pro Assad are now being very much pro the current government, because this is how they are programmed. So the international position in that field, I don't see that it's making a huge impact. And I think it's really sad and it's really shallow to do the comparison about how bad. I mean, define bad, what bad is. We had hundreds of thousands of people who are disappeared, and at least their families now are not waiting for an answer. They know that at least that prisons are empty. There are others who cannot find their loved ones. So I don't think when we speak about human rights, we can't speak about bad and worse. All human rights violations are awful, and they should be spoken about. In terms of women, also again, women who were particularly from specific region like Idlib. And if you're wearing a headscarf, it was an enough reason for you to be harassed on checkpoints. It was enough for you to be arrested for just your look or your ID. And now an Alawite woman who is having a particular style, who is crossing a particular checkpoint, also could be harassed for who she is. Is this bad or worse? They're both pretty bad, but we cannot really compare. So I don't think the situation for women has dramatically changed. Syria has always been a very patriarchal and misogynist space, like most of the region. Our rules are patriarchal and against women. Social norms, the conservative social norms, who do consider women as dependents and treat them as kids in terms of being able to take their own decisions. In war and post-war areas, these challenges and hassles became lethal, and they affect the marginalized communities, including the women within this society. So I think women were oppressed before the regime and during the uprising, and they are still now. But again, I don't think we can speak about bad and worse. I think women have been in this position and being pushed to defend themselves and to defend their existence and fight for their rights, and they are still doing so.
And I mean, as you've said, whether it's seen or not, and whether there's been material changes in the system that they live under or not, women have been, perhaps, like I said, whether it's seen or not, those who have been resisting the most in the last, well, for over a decade. And I think what we've seen from other uprisings and revolutions that, of course, are very big inspirations to people, you know, for example, Algeria and other places where women are, you know, where women were central to uprisings or revolutions, whether it's through their social reproduction or their active participation in other areas. After the, you know, quote unquote revolution, they end up either in the same, if not in some cases, worse positions that they were socially and politically. How can we ensure, or what are the ways we can ensure that women in Syria avoid that fate?
I mean, we kind of already in that fate, and we see it, I think, specifically in Egypt, when there was an uprising and they needed the women on their rights, and they also needed the women to be used as a kind of show for the Western governments or whatever. Women were being pushed to the very front. They were leaders. They were all over Tahrir Tahrir and everywhere else. And then as soon as the uprising ended, they were completely sidelined. And then we started to discover about all of this massive sexual harassments and violations that are committed by women. And most of the women activists, they were either silenced, disappear, or are in exile. And again, if you think about 2011, the biggest two revolutionary bodies were the local coordination communities and the revolutionary communities. They were both led by women, Suhair al-Atasi and Razan Zaitouni. I mean, and we didn't even think that it was weird at that time. I mean, everyone took it as like a common thing. Okay, two women are leading the only two big revolutionary parties. And then we started seeing how weird was that when things became really kind of masculine and testosterone took over the movements and the uprising. But I remember at the very beginning of the armament, when the demonstrators started to get arms, the only person that would actually be able to tell them what to do was Razan. So we would call her and please tell them not to, the regime was leaving some arms for them to take it. Please call this group and tell them not to, because they will only listen to her. So the position of the women during that period, it was like pure leaders. And then they kind of de-escalated into members, and then they were pushed outside. And now we're being told, so you didn't fight. Why do you want a chair on the table? You were not in the fighting, as if things were only being done by arms. But I mean, this is understood in a context where arms has been the main methods of toppling the regime and the main method to measure what victory is. It's not the social cohesion, it's not the peace, it's who won over who. And I believe also there is still, it's the arming and the grouping is still chaotic. And it's normal after only 1 year. And those armed groups are still the same. Those who were oppressing women in the north are still the same, are still there. They have different name, but they're the same men. They don't allow their wives to go out, and they would like maybe harass a woman if they saw her walking in the street in a special way or without the proper dress code in their minds. And there is no law to stop them from doing this. And even if there is law, there are no enforcement to actually stop them from applying that law. So it's, again, lots and lots of circles that every woman, even a non-activist housewife, needs to navigate to be able to live her life in the best way that she wants.
Thank you so much, Zaina. I mean, for you personally, obviously your work for a long time has been around supporting and training women, and obviously you're very, very passionate about that. What do you see as next for your work personally?
Well, I'm still working with women and marginalized groups. And I think with the Women Journalist Alliance, I'm hoping to be able to form this tribe of women who are from the whole region to support each other, because the support I've got from the Iraqi journalists during the time where I was being pretty much attacked in the Syrian context were really essential for me to survive and stay in this space. So I think forming this tribe that you can go to whenever you're in trouble, that is consistent of women and journalists who understand your context and have like different energies and different challenges, is really essential. I'm really hoping I would help those young journalists who are graduating now and seeing all of this hostile environment to have something to hold on to and to be able to survive in this space. I think staying in public spaces and staying active and loud is a great victory for us at this particular time. And I'm trying to help others to do it.
Thank you very much for talking to me today, Zaina. And you know, this is such an important area, and I imagine we could speak for hours and hours, and hopefully we will have many follow-ups as, you know, the developments on the ground, you know, continue. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. And that's it for today's episode of the Amargi Mosaic. We're a grassroots funded project, so your support really helps us keep going. As I said at the start, follow us at theamargi.com and on our socials to stay connected. And let's keep piecing together the mosaic. Until next time, take care.